Good morning. It is 11:12 a.m. on Sunday, December 22nd, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I've been up for a little bit. Felt like I needed to take a shower and accomplish a few other things before I recorded this today, but this is still 5 more minutes. And because it's Sunday, I'm continuing my rewatch of Cowboy Bebop with session, which one is this? 12, Jupiter Jazz, Part 1. So it's only part 1 of a two-parter, and I was actually a little bit torn in terms of I considered going ahead and doing both part 1 and part 2 in one video, just because it's a little harder to talk about half of a story without the other half, right? But I decided to go ahead and stick with, they are separate episodes, and so we'll just go ahead and we'll only be talking about part 1 for the moment right now. Although certainly some things, we'll need to wait until part 2 to discuss, because we only know little bits about it here, and then we learn more in part 2. But so I'm always a little bit frustrated with Jupiter Jazz as a story, just because on the one hand, some of the stuff it's doing is very cool. On the other hand, we've talked in the past, some of the past episodes, about how this show, while it's great in many respects, does have a few things that haven't aged super well. For example, like racial stereotypes and stuff like that. And then, of course, in this sequence, we have some stuff that's a little uncomfortable to watch in terms of, we've got some like transvestite stereotypes and some, classic, like, oh, they proposition Spike and he's like, ooh, ew, gross. Like, that stuff's not great. It wasn't great then. It's, I don't know that, like, I don't want to ever say, like, oh, it was fine before, but I would say it's more common before. And so now I'm glad that there is at least seems to be some improvement in our society's understanding that stuff's not really that cool. No. Both transgender people, and also anyone who is non-binary, and anyone even who may just be transvestite or into drag. Like, all of these are valid people and deserving of, empathy and respect, and making them the butt of a joke is not cool. So I want to say that right up front. Now, from there, let's talk a little bit about the stuff that actually goes on in this episode. We begin with the Native American character that we saw Spike meet early on in the series, Laughing Bull, who is watching, sitting outside their little home with they see a falling star. And so Laughing Bull tells the kid that, the star is the tear of a warrior, a lost soul who has finished his battles somewhere on this planet. A pitiful soul who could not find his way to the lofty realm where the Great Spirit awaits us all. It's kind of an ominous place to start the episode, right? We wonder who that could be. Because, on the one hand, obviously, I think there's the part of us where we could say, doesn't mean he's right. Like, he could just be making stuff up. But in the context of the episode, I think we're meant to understand that that's what this story is going to be about, right? But who do we mean? Who is this this warrior? Well, let's talk. Let's move on. So, we then next cut to another strange place, and where we suddenly meet Vicious, who we've not seen since the last big shootout with Spike, where they both kind of tried to kill each other and almost succeeded, but just because, like, Spike survived, and Vicious is kind of his Moriarty, so to speak, like they're too evenly matched, so Spike survived, of course Vicious survived too. But so Vicious if we recall the last story we saw him in, he had freshly murdered the head of one crime family and was negotiating with the others. And so in this one, we see that he's working with the group called the Van, which is these three old guys in these little chambers. And a lot of this stuff, like, you could be forgiven for feeling like that's all a little bit tell, don't show. We don't know who these people are. There's kind of some buzzwords. It's like, oh, what's going on? But like, honestly, I don't mind that about it. Because honestly, well, I don't know. Maybe I don't mind because I don't care for Vicious that much. That could be it. But like, for example, just, here's an exchange of the dialogue from that scene. Callisto's a frigid planet, Vicious. You'll need special clothing for the Arctic conditions. And Vicious says, cold climates do not concern me. He's like, true, your heart is colder than any planet, colder than the eye of a snake about to strike. But remember, Vicious, a snake cannot eat a dragon. And so, like that's really pretentious, right? Like, it's like that's not this show at its best, in my opinion. I mean, it's kind of, there's a level of pretension there, and they're all kind of talking in code because they're doing the gangland family stuff, and they're like, okay, yeah, fine, all right. But I mostly only care about Vicious for what he means to Spike. And so a lot of that stuff I don't care for, not that much, or it's like I'm less interested in. It's not that I don't like it, it's just that I want to move on to the characters I care about. But what we do get a little bit there is that there is a young man named Lynn who was part of the crime family that Vicious assassinated the leader of, who then pledges his unwavering loyalty to Vicious, and I think everyone around is a little bit like, oh, what's going on there? That seems a little bit strange that he would do that, and even Vicious basically doesn't promise to. He's like, okay, you're pledging your loyalty to me. I do not swear it back. I may have to betray you if it means my survival. But the guy seems committed, and so, even later when Spike sees him, that there's a question about that. Is like, that seems, it's Lynn is doing like this whole code of honor thing, but it's like, why though? Vicious certainly doesn't. So is it actually, is it honorful? That's not a word. What is the word? I'm thinking, honorable, duh. Is it an honorable thing to pledge loyalty to someone who doesn't deserve it? Yeah, so, I mean, in any event, though, now, after all of that, we finally cut to the Bebop. And we have Spike, who is complaining about the ship being too hot and muggy. Ed's playing some sort of doing something on the network. Spike goes to talk to Jet, and Jet informs him that, oh, yeah, the ship is like this because Faye stole all of the antifreeze out of the ship, along with emptying out their safe and leaving a note that's just kind of this fraught, like, don't come looking for me, it would be too difficult to see you, that sort of thing. And I as a fan of Faye as a character, I just am delighted by that sort of thing. The idea that she would take the time to write a note that pretends it's like, it's so hard to say goodbye, but I must farewell. But then she cleans out the safe on the way out and steals their antifreeze. Which, at least in the show, it seems like that, affects their climate control, but doesn't otherwise leave them dead in the water or anything. But anyway, she has now gone down to Callisto, the place where we know Vicious is going. And so they have Ed start looking for Faye, but Ed finds a signal for something called Codename Julia, which immediately has Spike's attention. Immediately he's following up on that, completely separate from looking for Faye, to the point where Jet realizes, uh-oh, Spike is back on his bullshit, so to speak, and tries to warn him. It's like, it's a common name. You don't know it's her. And besides, we have Faye to look for. And Spike basically says, I don't care about that anymore. I have to find out about this Julia thing. They have a big fight. They're yelling at each other. Jet basically tells him, don't come back. And Spike's like, fine, I don't care anyway. And then they argue about which of them is actually the lonely one that needs friends. And it's sad, right? Like, they're both kind of mad, but it's just like, oh, come on, guys. Especially since I think that, I guess it's an interesting question. I was going to assume something, but like, my position looking at that fight is that Jet is clearly correct, right? I mean, well, okay, it's different. It's a different perspective, right? Because Jet is correct that Spike is pursuing something that's probably only going to lead to heartache at best and probably get him killed, right? And that he's trying to say, I'm trying to be support for you. I'm trying to, like, I like you. I care about you. And you're pursuing someone who's probably dead and risking yourself against someone who hates you. And you're choosing that over being here. And that hurts, right? Like, I feel Jet in that moment. But Spike is, that's who Spike is. He's laconic most of the time, but it's because deep down he's got this thing that he just can't let go. And so, yeah, it's deeply in character for both of them, I think, to have that fight, even though it hurts us to watch it. But in any event, now, the Blue Crow is a nightclub on Callisto, and that's where the signal came from. And it turns out that's actually also, by coincidence, where Faye has gone. She's drinking at a bar. She's sneezing. It's unclear as whether she just sneezes when she gets drunk or if she has a cold or something. It's probably not important. But in any event, it's a jazz bar, and we see this handsome guy playing the saxophone. And, in the meantime, we cut to Spike beginning his search. He's just asking around. It seems like he's pretty haphazard for Spike, right? He's just literally walking around the street asking random people, Julia, Julia. And this is, of course, where we get the awkward bit I talked about before, where he talks to a Julius. And there's some interesting stuff, some world building that they really kind of brush past, which is the idea that there are no women on Callisto. Really? It was like, why? Why is that? That's weird, right? So there's a whole moon where there's just no women? What? Especially in a show where women are shown doing all sorts of things, right? Like, it's not like this is a generally sexist show. I mean, it has its moments, but so it's a surprising bit of world building. But in the meantime, though, Spike gets his clues that he should be looking for someone named Gren. And this is, of course, where we meet Gren, who is the saxophone player, flirts with Faye a little bit, that's her interpretation. But then he basically says, I'm not interested in women, but you should know that because there are no other women on Callisto, you should maybe be more careful than you're being. And she's not worried. And in fact, what we learn later is that she kind of actually wants someone to try to jump her so she can beat him up. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. So in any event, he tries to warn her. She doesn't, dismisses his attempt to help. And Spike gets himself into trouble because he's, of course, just walking around randomly asking for names. And once he does, he gets himself jumped by a gang who believe that he's vicious. And this sets him off because, of course, it would. Like, the idea, vicious is like his nemesis, right? And the idea that they would think he's vicious? What? Ah! And just totally sees red and he beats the crap out of these guys. But also, questions the last guy conscious to just say what's really going on here, what we learn is that there is a drug deal essentially between Gren and Vicious. And this ties back to the gangland scene with Vicious earlier, where they were questioning, like, why would this seller only want to work with Vicious? Why? That makes no sense. You don't really have the authority. You're not important enough to do this deal. Why would they only want to work with you? We don't know yet. But that now what we know is that, and then we also have Jet, who goes down to Callisto, and he's looking for Faye. So he stops at a bar, and it turns out it's a bar for people who have bounties on them and hide out there. And the bartender assumes that Jet is the same. They doesn't assume that he's a bounty hunter, but rather that he is someone evading a bounty. And Jet is kind of offended, but sees on the TV, sees Gren has a bounty on him. And at this point, it occurs to me to wonder if we should be using a them for Gren. We'll have to talk more about that in the next episode. I'm going to go ahead and use him just for the sake of this episode, because that's certainly how Gren presents. In any event, there's lots of, let's see, at this point, we have a nice, like, aw, Jet moment where he sees the information about the bounty and sort of instinctively goes to call to tell Spike about it, but then remembers, oh yeah, we're fighting. But this is where Faye was, encountered by this gang, and it's actually this gang that Spike had already beaten up that was kind of limping back, and she's excited to kind of fight. Like, it seems clear that she wants a fight, but Gren saves her anyway, pulls her away, and they go to his apartment, and they're talking, and this is a great conversation. Where the two of them have some really fun chemistry. I missed earlier the whole bit where, she's sneezing and he says, like, oh, well, they say if there's no one there to say take care, you'll turn into a fairy, which is kind of a weird superstition. It's sort of like it's a take, obviously, on people saying bless you. But I kind of like that there's sort of an evolution of that, and I love her responses, like, but I'm already a fairy, don't you know that? And, it's like, that's fun, but it's also ties into this theme of he reads her very accurately. She's talking about, he sees you're running away from something, from someone, and the whole take care thing. Like, the idea is you have to have someone else there to say it for you, right? You can't say it for yourself. So you need to have other people around you to take care, to care about you. And, but she's determined to say, like, oh, here's the quote. It's like, they say humans are social animals. They can't live alone, but you can live pretty well by yourself. I tell you, instead of feeling alone in a group, it's better to have real solitude all by yourself. And we can see that based on, like, but he calls her on it. He can tell, like, he says, you're afraid they'd abandon you, so you abandon them first. And he's absolutely right, of course. And we can see that in Faye, is that she couldn't make herself feel at home on the Bebop, and so she kind of did the underachiever thing, right? Like, she sabotaged it on purpose. And and that's where the thing, like emptying out the safe and taking the antifreeze and the insult to injury note, like, that's not how you actually try to get away with stealing something. That's how you twist the knife, because you're trying to make it hurt, because she's trying to sabotage the relationship subconsciously. And I love the conversation that they have, and there's just some really interesting chemistry there. But, it's not a romantic chemistry, because he's explicitly said, I'm not into women, which I guess means he's gay, but it's complicated as we learn. So goes off to take a shower, and this is where she realizes, starts looking at all the pictures on the wall that seem to be like, pictures from a war, seeing Gren there, but also seeing in the picture, uh-oh, Vicious. And then Vicious leaves a voicemail on the answering machine, and she's like, oh no, because we, of course, remember the last time she saw Vicious is when he kidnapped her in order to use her as bait to try to kill Spike. So, yeah, that's suddenly bad news for her. Spike catches up with Vicious and Lynn, basically questions Lynn, why would you defend this guy? Demands that he moves, and then what we see is what appears to be Lynn has shot Spike, and he's laying down in the snow, has dropped his own gun. Like, we, at this point in the episode, we don't understand exactly how that worked, because surely Spike is not actually dead, we would say, right? So, but he seems to have been shot, at least, and Vicious and Lynn get away. In the meantime, now realizing the connection between Gren and Vicious, Faye goes in to confront him in the shower, and at this point, she sees that Gren has breasts and curves, feminine curves, but also apparently male genitalia and male presenting. And I'm going to briefly call the episode out for, there are definitely shots of Gren before, like in the saxophone player outfit, where the chest is obviously flat. It's really like, it's not only flat, but it's like a very sort of svelte, narrow chest with a shirt hanging right flat down over it. And so it's like, are there breasts under there? I don't think so. I think it's an animation cheat, but all right. But in any event, but apparently, so she's confused. Like, wait, what are you? She's confused. He kind of pushes her up against a wall and says, I'm both at once and neither. What does that mean? And that's the cliffhanger. So what's, the resolution is necessary for Gren's character for us to understand better what's going on there. But, like in this first part, the kind of insensitive way that it dealt with, the transvestite prostitutes is not sensitive. So what's going on here? But at the very least, Gren as a character is being shown as someone who certainly has maybe some ulterior motives and some dangerous associations, but shown as smart and sensitive and someone who would at least seem to be somewhat sympathetic. So we have to wait till next week, I guess, to learn more about Gren and what's the deal there. And, everyone's in trouble again. So, like I said, there's some things about this episode that I really like, some things that I really kind of cringe at, and we'll have to wait to wrap it up next week when we'll talk about Jupiter Jazz Part 2 next Sunday. But in the meantime, I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.